You don't want to use that one. It's not going to be on the stream. They're going to have Michael's going to give you a handheld. You're going to stand right where Michael's standing, which is going to be in front of these flowers here.
I just need a hand mic and switch through papers. That's okay.
Yeah, I get that.
Thank you, Robert.
Of course.
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Courtroom. My name is Michael D'Aresto. I'm the director of the Riley Center for Media and Public Affairs at the Manchester School of Mass Communication. Before we get started, I want to go over just a few housekeeping notes. Please silence your cell phones. We do encourage tweeting, texting, Instagramming, Snapchatting, and all other social media engagement. Please be sure to tag us if you post about today's event. Second, we have built-in time after the conversation between Jan and Coach Mulkey to answer audience questions, so please hold all questions until then. Finally, I am happy to turn it over to Dr. Kim Bissell, Dean of the Manchester School, for some opening remarks.
Good evening, everyone. I know you can do better. You can do women's basketball. Good evening, everyone. That's a little better. Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Kim Bissell. As Michael mentioned, I'm the Dean of the Manchester School of Mass Communication here at LSU. I am so excited to bring you all here tonight for this very exciting and engaging conversation between Jan Crawford and Coach Mulkey. This has been an event that's been a couple of months in the planning. So I know you're going to get a lot out of tonight. So what I would like to do is take just a moment and introduce our two speakers over here. First, Jan Crawford is a nationally recognized journalist and CBS News chief legal correspondent. She's the leading authority on the U.S. Supreme Court, covering some of the most legal and political issues of our time. She began her career at the Chicago Tribune, has provided expert legal analysis from major networks, and is the author of The Supreme Court, The Inside Story of the Struggle for Control of the United States Supreme Court, a New York Times bestseller, not surprising. She's a brilliant legal mind and an incredible storyteller, and we are so honored to have her here tonight. Joining here is a woman who really needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to do my best. LSU women's basketball head coach Jan Mulkey, a Hall of Fame coach, four-time national champion, and the architect of LSU's first women's basketball national title. Coach Mulkey has not only transformed LSU's program, but has also left a lasting mark on the sport itself. Her leadership, competitive spirit, and unwavering commitment to excellence have made her one of the most respected figures in basketball today. So please join me in welcoming Jan Crawford and Coach Kim.
Well, I guess I better put my glasses on for this. I want to introduce my mother. And before we go any further, Jan, really the most important people in her life, she needs to introduce.
Well, first of all, thank you all so much for having me here on LSU's campus. In the interest of full disclosure, I just got to get this out of the way, though. Roll Tide. It's really an honor to be here, and I was able to speak with some of the students earlier, and just so impressive at the law school and with the honors program and the manship school. I mean, it's just really impressive students you have here at LSU, and like I told them, they've got a lot of work ahead of them to fix some of the issues my generation may have caused up in DC and in some of the state houses. So I have a lot of faith in our future. And thanks to Kim for, this was all her idea. So we'll see how it goes. Y'all pray for me. But I'm really honored, and Kim also helped make this happen, to have my mother here, Carolyn Crawford. She is a Mississippi girl, grew up in Ocean Springs, but we all lived in Alabama, where my dad was from, in North Alabama. So my mom, Carolyn Crawford. And I have 3 of my 4 kids here, 2 of whom surprised me yesterday. I was not expecting them. My oldest daughter, Carolyn, my second oldest daughter, Louisa, and then my son, Jack, also.
She's not going to mention her baby girl who's going to be here. And she is a women's basketball player at the Division I level, and they made the first NCAA tournament, George Mason. So she could not be here. Yeah. So I keep praying that they get sent here, you know, like in the first and second round. So, yeah, but let me get started. I'm not a journalist, but I agreed to do this because of my friendship with Jan, but maybe because I had a weak moment, because I don't like media.
I think we all know that.
And so I'm gonna ask questions that I was curious about when we became friends. And so the first thing is, how did you get started in journalism? How did you get started in that field?
Well, like I said, you know, I Bosch, Mississippi, but my dad was from North Alabama, and I grew up on a farm about 45 miles outside of Huntsville, family farm. I did not know any journalists. I didn't even think that journalism could be a career. I mean, it just never occurred to me. I thought maybe I'd be a lawyer, because Mom always said I like to argue, which sounds like somebody else I know. But then I went to Alabama for undergrad, and I thought I needed writing experience for law school. So I went into the student newspaper office, the Crimson White, nervously asked if I could get a job or get a story to write, and I was hooked. I mean, I just loved it. I couldn't believe that there was a career. You could go out and interview people that you might not ever get to talk to. You could ask people questions. You could get to tell everybody about it first, and you got paid for it. Like, it just was crazy to me. So I decided that then on I wanted to be a journalist, and that's how I got on that path. I never thought about it until I got to Alabama. And then that changed, obviously, the course of my life. But, you know, life is like that. I mean, you have to you never know where it's going to take you. And then I went to law school, thought I might actually end up being a lawyer, but instead I ended up covering the Supreme Court. And you never thought
That I would be a coach.
you thought about maybe being a lawyer.
Yes, because I like to argue too, with referees though. So
What kind
Jan,
of lawyer would you have been?
well, I would think I would be a poor lawyer, because I would be the defense lawyer, right? Just assign me somebody to defend. I couldn't sit behind a desk, but you do have your law degree, but did you ever practice?
Uh-uh.
And if you could practice, what would you have been?
I've been a trial lawyer. Yeah, I would love to argue. I would love to have been a plaintiff's lawyer. Yeah, I mean, I just, I think there are certain themes that you see where a lot of what I found interesting about journalism was, if there were wrongs, that you could uncover them, that you could make a difference. And that was really appealing to me. And I think that, the trial bar does an excellent job of doing some of that as well. Plus, man, you can make a lot of money doing that. A lot more than a journalist, though.
So you started out in print journalism, you worked at the Chicago Tribune.
The world's greatest newspaper. And I have to say, Chris Drew, where are you? Are you here? Chris Drew is a professor here at LSU and a colleague of mine in the Washington Bureau at the Chicago Tribune. When he walked in, he hasn't aged at all. And that's been, 20 years ago, even longer. So it was Tribune was a great newspaper, great reporters. Chris, of course, one of them, and now teaching students here at LSU.
So you go from print journalism at the Tribune to law school. Why did you go into broadcast journalism?
Sometimes I wonder that, actually. I miss print. I thought that I could reach more people. The reach of broadcast news is much bigger. I mean, obviously, when you're doing the morning news, evening news, you're talking about 10 to 12 million viewers a day. And that's a way of, I really believe that as journalists, I think about this a lot. Like, I'm standing in the shoes of people in North Alabama who can't be in Washington, D.C., who don't get to go to the Supreme Court, who don't get to listen to arguments. And I have this duty to explain and tell them what's happening, what's going on in Washington. And, I'm not the story. It's my job to tell the story. And that, I think, is the mission of journalism, the mission, I think, the media, not CBS, but the media has kind of gotten confused of note. But that's how I went into TV.
Do you think?
Although I miss print, and I was fortunate to work with some really amazing, talented journalists at the Tribune who taught me a lot about journalism.
So I'm going to ask from a perspective of a coach and probably a lot here. It just seems to me that the newspapers are kind of going out of business and everything's going up online now.
Yeah, I think that's really sad.
And I have read and see things where in broadcast, people are losing their jobs. A lot of colleagues that have been in the business for a long time are unemployed now. So what do you think the future of journalism is, both print and broadcast?
Oh, man, that's a hard question. The future of journalism, I worry about it. I know you love the media.
Yeah. But I'll hire them if they get out of journalism and they want to come be coaches.
Why don't you like the media?
Why don't I like the media? Do you have enough time? Do I really want to know? I go back to the Walter Cronkite days.
And where it goes.
And that was the only thing
And
you
where
waited
Walter
for.
Cronkite?
CBS. You waited for him to come on. And now you have so much what's considered media, if you want to consider social media. And I don't find that it's reputable. I don't find that people do their research. Everybody wants to get the first story out. Everybody wants clickbait, lies are told. And I know my mother and that generation probably we believe that stuff. If you don't understand social media and you read something, you take it as fact, because we grew up in a generation where you had so much respect for the media because you knew they weren't out to get you, they were out to report the facts. And now you feel always that you're in a defense mode because you're being attacked. And that's just me, I'm talking from my heart. That's what I do.
The reason I was wondering, because you asked me what I think is the future of the media, and I think a lot of people feel that way. I think a lot of people, if you look at public confidence in the news media, it's down there with Congress. that's a problem because democracy, I really believe, does not work, without an informed electorate. And if we don't believe and have faith and confidence in what we're reading about what's happening, at the seat of power or in the state legislature or wherever, that's a problem. And, I think the media generally has lost its way at times. And I agree that there are times when the advent of social media, there's a temptation to pursue the sensational or the clickbait, as you say. And I worry about that in the future because once people start losing their faith and confidence in the media, then they don't really know where to turn for accurate sources of information, and then they're more easily manipulated. I will say I find encouraging things, including, one example, Louisiana LSU grad, Wendy McMahon at CBS, she has completely revamped our evening news. And it's kind of going back to the age of where it's more focused on the facts and the story. Y'all should check it out. We've just launched it. But it's a very different approach.
Before I lose my train of thought, do you, and I don't want to put you on the spot because you are a journalist,
I know, I'll be like,
but Jan, your favorite, and I think that when I spoke and did my homework with people that have worked with you, that's a common theme. You never show your hand. You make sure that you're fair. Do you think that even the journalists, the broadcast journalists or the writers, are they influenced by what they read on social media? And y'all spend time having to go, not true, check that one out. That's a lot of time and a lot of investigating, and I would have to think y'all have to do that.
Yes and no. I think the bigger concern is that we start to care too much about what does social media say, what pickup are we getting on social media, and obviously it's important. That generation, y'all get a lot of your news on TikTok. So that's the challenge for old media like me, newspapers, television, is how do you use social media in a way that informs people without, becoming ridiculous and irrelevant, and alienating people who, want a more in-depth story. So I think that's something that we haven't really figured out. I think, the perception that the media is not fair, or is biased. Most reporters are liberal. There's no question about that. And you have to be able to, whatever your opinions are, you have to be able to put those aside. And I think, you cannot forget that you are not the story.
Yes.
And I've seen antics sometimes in the White House briefing room, make it like the reporter is one gotcha moment. You see it, you'll see it. And I think that it also explains where journalism has gone a little off course when people forget. Our role is to stand in y'all's shoes because you don't get to be there. And then we just report what's going on. And we explain why it's important. It's not like,
You're an attorney, you're a lawyer. You cover the.
I got all of it covered, right?
Yeah.
Lawyer.
Journalist,
I do not sell
mother.
those cars, I don't, that would be my other.
But let me ask you this, do you think you have to be a lawyer to cover the Supreme Court?
No, well, in fact, you don't have to be a lawyer to be a justice of the United States Supreme Court. All of them are and have been, but you don't have to be a lawyer. It makes it easier. I went to law school in Chicago. I took a leave of absence from the Tribune. And almost went and worked at a firm in New York. And Jack Fuller, the editor of the paper, said, you need to come back to the Tribune. You don't want to be a lawyer. They're all miserable. So I went back to the Tribune, and the Tribune sent me to Washington in 1994 to cover the Supreme Court. And it's really helped. It's helped me cover the court and get up to speed on cases much quicker, understand the law better, of course, but it's not required. Do you have to be a college basketball player, be a college basketball coach?
No,
I mean, you were I mean, you were a superstar and now you're a superstar.
There are a lot of great coaches that never played college basketball. They probably had a background in high school, but they didn't have to go on. I know all of us see you on TV, and when we usually see you reporting on opinions that come down, we see you on the steps of the Supreme Court. You're usually freezing and you've got your scarf on, you know.
My mother hates that, by the way.
Yeah, and we're sitting
You
there,
stand outside in the rain.
we're sitting there going, I wonder what it is like on the inside. Do people know? I don't think any of us know.
Have
what
you
it's
ever
like
been to the Supreme Court?
inside the Supreme Court
So
and
that's
watched
pretty good. That's actually a great number, and it's not easy to get, inside the court, and certainly not at the court for an argument. They only are on the bench about 2 weeks.
Well, give us kind of I know you can talk all day, but give us what
I
life
could actually.
is like as you're sitting there. Walk us through something, a case or something, and then you get their opinion, and you run out there and you report.
Yeah, so when I first started covering the court, like I said, it was in 1994. I still will never forget when I first walked up to the Supreme Court. I know y'all seen pictures of it, but it's this, awe-inspiring white marble building. And, you walk up those steps, you can't go in that way anymore, but it just felt so majestic and awe-inspiring. And then you get in the court, and I was shocked that the courtroom itself is actually quite small. It's smaller than probably the Alabama Supreme Court. It's smaller than I had expected. And, it's just got the ornate carvings on the ceiling, the red velvet curtains, but it has a very intimate feel so that, when the justices, they sit in almost like a kind of a line on the bench, and then the lawyers argue right in front of them. And it's not that far, like the lawyers are not, it's pretty close, like it would be terrifying.
How do the justices sit? Is there
The
seniority?
chief justice sits in the middle, and then it goes down in order of seniority, so the junior justices will be on the end. And that's the thing about the court, everything is in order of seniority. So like, I'm my oldest daughter, but like the everything is very tradition bound. And so even when they, take the bench, it's almost like they go in, the chief justice is the most senior, and then the next justice would be who's been on the court the longest, all the way down to the junior justice. And they have all these kind of like traditions. So the junior justice, when they have arguments and they hear arguments in cases, and they ask questions, and it's really rapid fire. Like I said, it's terrifying. I cannot imagine. And the lawyers who argue in front of the court are brilliant. You're going to have your Solicitor General arguing there next month. And it's just rapid fire questions. And then after that, they will meet a couple times a week in a private conference. They call it conference. And it's in this beautiful wood paneled room off the chambers of the Chief Justice. And it's just the 9 of them. No secretaries, no law clerks. And that's where they sit and discuss the cases and cast their initial votes. And then after that conference, the Chief Justice or whichever justice is in the majority, that will assign the opinion. But the junior justice in those private conferences, if somebody knocks on the door, they have to get up and they do. They also are on the cafeteria committee. They head up the cafeteria committee, which apparently is the leader's job. So it's very tradition bound. And I think those traditions are important. I mean, remember, these justices serve together for life, right? And so they've got to find a way to get along because they disagree sometimes so vehemently on the law. And they have lunch together in the private dining room after arguments. And they actually interact socially sometimes.
Well, that goes
Well, I
to
think we
Scalia,
they're friends. Well, you should see some of the friendships on the court.
like Scalia and Ginsburg.
Yeah, the Scalia, who was the one of the most conservative justices, very close friends with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was one of the most liberal. And they would vacation together, and they're spouses were, the four of them were all very good friends. And Justice Ginsburg never cooked a day in her life, but her husband Marty was a great cook. And Justice Scalia's wife Maureen, so they would cook these wonderful meals. And of course, Scalia was a big Italian, so.
Hey, baby, close to home now.
First Italian-American on the Supreme Court, yeah.
Jan, what's the most?
But we have current justices, how about this, you're like this. They also, like, you'd surprise, there's some, they have, I wouldn't say they're big buddies, best friends, but like Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who's a big women's basketball fan, by the way. He's gone to a bunch of Final Fours. I had him at your Final Four.
He was in 2019.
Yeah, he coached his girls' basketball teams. He's a big Notre Dame fan now.
He's a Notre Dame guy, his daughter goes to school
That's
there.
right. Anyway, he's taken Justice Kagan, Elena Kagan, who's very liberal. They've gone to basketball games, women's basketball games together.
Talk to us
So
about
that's
our
it,
own
just helps
Supreme
keep
Court
when
justice.
they're colleagues, I think it kind of helps. Oh, well, y'all got Alabama.
We wanna talk
I mean,
about
I'm a
Amy.
Louisiana girl on the
We
Supreme
want
Court.
to talk about Amy a little bit, right? We're wrapping her in this.
Yes, Justice Barrett. So, Justice Barrett grew up in Metairie, and she taught at Notre Dame. But she joined the court, replaced Justice Ginsburg, and really provided that key kind of conservative vote. She was the key fifth vote to overturn Roe versus Wade. So people thought that she was this, very solid conservative. But she has issued some decisions and separate writings recently that made conservatives really upset with her. And so now they're all worried that she's not rock solid like they hoped. But I think that's wrong. I think that she's someone, they all have very different styles, very different personalities. It's like 9 justices on the court, but it's almost like 9 separate law firms. They have their own staffs, they have their own law clerks. And so, they have their own approaches to doing things and views on the law. They're all independent. And a lot of them have this big struggle of which way you should read the Constitution. And Justice Barrett is someone, she likes to know how things are gonna go 5 or 6 cases down the road. So she's not gonna be swinging for the fences, like say Justice Thomas would or Justice Alito, some of those. She's a little more cautious, but that doesn't mean that, she's gonna be some big liberal.
What's the most memorable case or cases that you have covered? And you've been doing this a long time. So
This is
Mike,
my
what you wanna
31st
start?
year covering the Supreme Court.
Wow. Has anybody covered it? Wow.
Nina Totenberg has covered it longer than I have for NPR. John Cupid at CNN. Yeah, there's a couple actually, others. Yeah, because the court's a great job. I love it. It's just wonderful for the Supreme Court because you really, there's no camera in there. So you really have an important role to explain what's happening. And anyway, most memorable.
Most memorable case
Well,
for.
Bush versus Gore was very memorable. That was when the Supreme Court stopped the Florida recount, which ended up handing the election, although he would have won anyway, subsequent story showed to George W. Bush. That was memorable because that was a late night decision, December 12th. And there were all these men, I was at the Tribune then, there were all these men walking around the Supreme Court in full makeup, which I thought was so funny. They're all the TV guys up there. That was memorable. Obamacare, when the Supreme Court upheld the Affordable Care Act, which was, of course, President Obama's signature achievement, with a vote cast by John Roberts, who conservatives lost it on the Chief Justice, and that was very memorable. Dobbs, which overturned Roe versus Wade. I mean, the Supreme Court has such an impact on all of our lives in ways big and small, in our relationships, in our employment, in how we worship, and it's sometimes the branch of government we think least about.
You mentioned Obamacare, and I did a little research. Unlike a lot of journalists, they want the quick story, but I do my homework. That's how I grew up. You study, you outstudy the guy that started it. So I want to read you something. It's funny you mentioned Obamacare. I spoke to a former senior producer at CBS News. And this is what she said. Jan is one of the most respected journalists in Washington. Her knowledge of and insights into the Supreme Court and our legal system are unparalleled. I worked with Jan for nearly a decade, and one of my favorite days was in June 2012 when the Supreme Court handed down a decision on the constitutionality of Obamacare. Just sit tight. Several correspondents rushed through the decision in a race to announce the ruling first. And they got it wrong. Not Jan. While appearing on live television, she tuned out the noise around her and the pressure to report quickly and carefully considered the opinion pages in her hand. She then looked into the camera and announced the correct ruling. It was a master class in the importance of delivering reporting that is accurate and complete in a media environment that so often values speed and snap judgments more. Jan has been a role model and a mentor to the journalists with whom she works and has set the standard for reporting with integrity, fairness, and humility. You know who that might be? Horn.
Oh,
Caroline Horn.
She's an amazing editor. She was just.
And so that might explain why I do like you. Because I don't like the media. I know and can see through
I
people.
feel like my face is good. That actually made me.
And I just thought, that had to be nervous. You had to be very nervous standing there watching all these young ones reporting the wrong facts, and here you
No, I
are
had no
with
idea.
your hands shaking, probably going, I gotta get this right.
No, none of that happened.
Tell us what happened.
Now you're directing my journey.
I know, tell us
Assuming
how
what
you did
happened,
it.
I wouldn't.
Were you cool as a cucumber? Were you nervous? Did you take it long?
I find that to be the most stressful part of my job, and the way it's a little different since the pandemic, but then we stand in front of the Supreme Court on decision days. We don't know what decisions are coming down until they're announced. So we have no idea what the rulings are going to be. And we would have interns in line inside the Supreme Court to get a copy of the opinion, and then they would run it out to us, shove it in our hands, and then on live television, you flip through it and say what the decision is. And I was, in that case, I did my report. I was fortunate to have a tremendous producer who ran our special events team, Al Ortiz, and I said, I've got it out. You know, after I looked at it, I said, I had him, he was on my ear. I said, they've upheld it. And he's like, are you sure? And in my ear, and I was like, yeah, and he said, you're sure? And I said, yeah, you know, and then we went on our special report, you know, I said that. But I had no idea until I got back to the newsroom that 2 other networks had gotten it on live television. And that case, actually, that we changed the way, I had my insistence, because they were good reporters too, it's just the speed. We started having, like, I work with a wonderful law professor now, who I will look at his decision, say Dobbs, I'm like, here's the decision, this is the ruling, and then I'll say, you know, Jessica, yes, this is it, so we confirm it, and then I will report it, because it's too, that atmosphere is too supercharged and it's too risky, I think. So that's how we do it now, just to have that kind of dual checking. But yeah, I mean, I had no idea that would happen. And it's very stressful time. That's my most stressful time. I really hate doing those kind of breaking news. You know, you've got to be first, get on. And I will always appreciate, at least at CBS, they value accuracy over that speed. And I never felt pressure from CBS to feel like, what is it, what is it, what is it? Or Al Ortiz never said, or, you know, well, this network and this work is just the opposite, you know. Never told me that. They just trusted the people that work there and emphasized the accuracy. So I'm really grateful for that.
Tell us about your book. You wrote.
Well,
I think you can still.
Tell them. That's right.
Maybe I'll get 5 cents. Check her. No, I wrote a book right around the time when I was leaving the Tribune, looking at the Rehnquist court and how it had turned to the right after some disappointing years for conservatives who have tried many years to turn the court to the right and undo some of those liberal rulings of previous courts, like the Warren Court era. And so it was kind of a story of how a Supreme Court with 9 justices, 7 of whom at that time had been appointed by Republican presidents, kept becoming such a disappointment to conservatives and failing in case after case to undo some of these decisions that they thought were so wrong, whether it was on abortion or affirmative action or voting rights or, religion and public life, and how George Bush and his nominations of John Roberts and Sam Alito had finally started to turn the court firmly to the right. And then, of course, the next book would be how President Trump's 3 nominations have solidified this court to the right for a generation. Because that is the court we have now. I think it is not the most conservative Supreme Court in history, but it's close.
In your book, you write about Sandra Day O'Connor.
Cam read my book, by the way.
Because I was at some point thinking about becoming an attorney. Boy, wouldn't that have been fun?
I read her book too, but I didn't read her book. I didn't even know she had a book. This is so embarrassing because I like to be prepared. And I did not know she had a book until after I interviewed her. And I was just mortified.
She didn't do her homework.
I didn't. I called people, just like what you're doing. I talked to Jen. I asked, tell me about this. Because in my interviews, I try to really understand people and what helps kind of make them tick, so I would ask you questions and, what are you most proud of? What's, the word people, your greatest compliment? I bet y'all can guess what she told me. The great tough.
I always wanted to be called tough. I waited and waited years for a coach to say that to me. And I think it was my junior year at Louisiana Tech. And old Barmore called me over and he said, well, you are one tough little sucker. And I just took that as the greatest compliment that you could throw anything at me. And it's just, I'm going to keep going. But my generation, when I think of the Supreme Court, I think of Sandra Day O'Connor.
You would have liked her.
And I read where she
No
was-
nonsense.
Yeah.
No nonsense. Grew up in Arizona on a ranch. Graduated near the top of her class at Stanford Law School and couldn't get a job. The only job she was offered, well, she told me that this was, and I admired Justice O'Connor very much. She told me that story partly got wrong in the telling to me, it got it partly wrong, that she was not offered a job as a secretary, graduating near the top of her class at Stanford Law School. She refused to take that typing test. So she didn't get that job offer. That was the world that she grew up in. But, she hung her shingle and out and, went to work. And that was her attitude. It was a lot like, today's a new day, let's get to work. And she was the first female justice on the Supreme Court.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. Who is the most compelling justice? Think.
Current and former.
Just, you can probably
Because
do
I would
that.
say, I do think that Justice Barrett right now is very compelling. Because again, we're trying to understand her. I think our newest Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, also very interesting. She's quite liberal. She's the first African-American woman on the Supreme Court. And she has jumped right in there and not going to waste a minute. When Justice Alito joined the Supreme Court, he told me that he did not want to ask a lot of questions right at first, because it's like when you move into a new neighborhood and you tell people to repaint their houses a certain color, he wasn't going to do that. He just wanted to sit back and give a lay of the land. Justice Jackson, she's not like that. She's going to tell you what color your house should be painted. Like she believes, I mean, I think she sees herself as an historic figure. And, you know, if people say, well, this is not the way we do it at the Supreme Court, that's part of the problem. So she's very, I think, going to be very interesting to watch her cases and kind of how she leads on the bench and at oral argument. But I think the most compelling justice on the court right now, I would say, is Justice Thomas. He's the most misunderstood. And he hates the media probably more than you do.
That's why I like it, right?
But no, he's the most misunderstood. I talk about this in my book, but you know, when he joined the Supreme Court to replace the great Thurgood Marshall, the storyline really quickly developed that he was just following the great Antonin Scalia. You know, that he was unqualified, he wasn't that smart, and so Scalia was, you know, like the puppet master. He was just a puppet, and that storyline is demonstrably false. And when I was doing research for the book, the papers of Justice Harry Blackmun were in the Library of Congress. And in his papers, he took such detailed notes that remember I was telling you all about the conferences and how they meet and they go around and cast their votes right after they've heard the arguments on how they're going to vote in a case. Justice Blackmun would record how they voted, and then you could trace that initial vote, and you could chase that and see who might have changed their votes when the opinion came out. Justice Thomas, that year, his first year in the court, if any justice changed their votes or changed their minds, it was Justice Scalia who was following Justice Thomas, not the other way around. And it happened on Justice Thomas's very first week. He cast his vote in a case from Louisiana, in fact. He cast his vote in a case. He couldn't sleep that night. He went to the Chief Justice the next day and he said, I threw in the towel. I was, you know, he'd been the junior, the youngest, so he voted last. Remember, they do everything in order to seniority. And when it got to him, the case was 8-0. So he cast his vote. This case was going to be 9-0. It was about a guy named Fuchsia who was found not guilty by reason of insanity, and he was in a mental institution, and the state of Louisiana wanted to keep him there, and he wanted to get out. So he was losing. He was winning in this case 9-0. Thomas goes back the next day and says, I want to change my vote. I really threw in the towel. You know, it was 8-0, it got to me. And the Chief Justice said, fine, you know, change your vote. He had this big voice. So Justice Thomas wrote his decision, and that's how they do it a lot. They write up their opinions, how they're doing it, and then they circulate that around. And so a lot of this, then they read that, and they'll send another memo around. He sent his opinion around, his dissent. Justice Kennedy read it, he changed his vote. Chief Justice Rehnquist, he read it, he changed his vote. Justice Scalia read it, he changed his vote. This was Thomas's first week on the court. That case ended up being 5-4, and it started out 9-0, but that wasn't the storyline. The storyline was Thomas was not that smart. He had to follow whatever Scalia said. That was grounded in racism. And that narrative, that false narrative persists to this day, but he doesn't care. He doesn't care what the media says. He doesn't care what people say. He doesn't care. But
Sounds familiar. I like that.
Something that, yeah.
And you know what's great about
So that's why I say I think he's probably compelling, because I think he's very misunderstood. You can disagree, and people do disagree vehemently with his approach to the law, his willingness to overturn past cases, but he is a strong intellectual force on that Supreme Court.
Well, he's like me.
You can't say
He's
that.
like me in that he likes you. I did my research on him.
You didn't know that.
In 2009, he did an interview on C-SPAN. And he says he singled you out as a favorite reporter. There are, quote, wonderful people out there who do a good job, do a fantastic job, like Jan Greenberg.
Oh, that was my married name.
Well, he says that. Justice
That's my
Thomas
kid's
said,
name.
referring to Miss Crawford by her married name at the time. So he likes you, so if you ever want an interview, you may be doing.
I did
it.
interview,
There you go.
Yeah, I did that, that's when I was at ABC.
Yeah.
But you know, that kind of goes back to what you were saying, Kim. You know, you've got to, like on that, you can't just assume things. You know, people, I think that people assume, oh, you know, he's new, he's young, he's just following Scalia, but none of that was true. None of that was true.
Well, let's
What do
change.
you think that people assume about you that they get?
Oh, we'd have to get in line and figure this out. I'm supposed to be this, and this, and I'm none of the above, but I don't care. I'm like, you know, I don't care. I don't read it. I don't care. It doesn't faze me. I want to get away from the Supreme Court, and we'll let y'all ask questions in a minute, but I love country music. And if you watch sometimes on CBS, they'll say Jan Crawford reporting from Nashville, Tennessee, interviewing all these different country music artists. So my question to you is, tell me some of the favorites that you've interviewed. I know you don't have a favorite country music artist because you really don't listen to it as much as I do.
I
But
know,
I'm curious in
She's
your-
always like these old country music.
Yes.
I don't know any of it.
Yes, but in your interviews, you make great eye contact. I gave Jan the only exclusive interview when we won the national championship. And we went to DC and all these people were calling and wanting these exclusive interviews. In fact, I don't know if I should say this, but Nora O'Donnell, who was with CBS at the time, I said, no, but if y'all will let Jan Crawford, I'll do it with CBS. And I thought they'd say no, but they said yes.
And we weren't friends.
And we weren't
That's how-
friends.
In fact, that's how we, after that interview, we just.
And what made me want her is she had a daughter that played college basketball. She had a son that played college football.
And we
She,
had mutual friends in the board.
she knew people that I knew, and I said, I'll let her do it. And so I found out more about Jan later when I would be watching CBS, and she's interviewing Little Big Town. And she's interviewing Hank Williams Jr., and she's interviewing all these people. So I want to know, who was your favorite interview for whatever reason?
Oh, gosh.
Come on, give me some that you
I don't
really
remember
heard.
the half the ones I've done. In country music.
Country music, I'd like to know those that were interesting to you or things you learned.
Well, I mean, not the Hank Williams Jr. one.
You didn't like that one, okay.
No, y'all.
Okay, change the subject.
That one was, no. I don't know, Eric Church was fascinating. Kenny Chesney, Aldine. You know, those are some more I've done recently. I mean, I've interviewed Darius three times. I mean, I do most of the country music pieces for CBS. Let me ask y'all this. Do you know how many network news correspondents grew up in rural Alabama? Not any. So I get to do the country music pieces.
Because they think you love
I
country
think I
music.
love country music. So I get to do the sports pieces, especially football. I get to cover Super Bowl because I love football. I love women's basketball. They know that. And Mason Nation. Anytime that you need somebody to shoot a gun on TV, I'm there.
And it's all because she grew up in Alabama. It's not because she's beating the door down. I'm an expert.
But
in
it's
these
great because
areas.
the court's not on the bench in the summer. They take 3 months off at the end of June. And they're not on the bench all the time like they're off this week, for example. So, you know, it's fun to do those kind of pieces. I really enjoy it. And as a result, I got to interview Coach Mulkey, a very good interview. I despite not having read the book before the interview, only after. And then I interviewed Hurley that year. I'm going to Thursday to interview Hannah Hidalgo at Notre Dame. Maybe I can interview you and y'all win it again this year.
You were in Iowa City. See, now you're acting like a reporter. Okay, but tell them about Clark. The dig about me getting to the
Yeah, I
Final
interviewed
Four.
Clark before I interviewed you.
Yeah.
Yeah, when she had made her historic scoring record.
And we had great conversation because Pistol Pete, right? Pistol Pete's record, and we would have these talks, and I would tell her what I thought about not having a 3-point line back in the day, and it was just really good. It's fun to talk to somebody that has an athletic mind and is extremely intelligent, but.
Well, you grew up in Alabama, you're gonna watch football. And my dad was a huge basketball fan. My mom, she watches my kids' games and she knows exactly how many rebounds, assists, points Paige has had, shots missed by the end of the game. We were big. I was a big admirer of Coach Mulkey and Paige, my daughter. I used to watch a lot of your games, so it's been great getting to know you. She's an amazing person, and that I think definitely sometimes gets lost.
Well, could I hire you when you retire from CBS? And so all these people that bash me on social media,
You have great people.
you can go out
And you have great people.
You can go out.
who are around you.
I know we're getting close on time, so y'all can ask some questions, but let me throw this out, because this judge absolutely adores you. And he's a mutual friend through friends of mine, and
I don't know, you're making me, I'm like,
you can cry later.
No, it's just like,
But you need to hear this from people that, they make the laws of our country. And so I call this federal appeals judge, and you can tell he's a Southerner. He goes, she's a whip-smart reporter, lawyer with a gift for writing and language, who God created to be a legal journalist. She's old school. Because she's from the South, she doesn't bring East Coast bias to her work like so many other journalists at elite media institutions. She was raised on a farm, but later lived in Chicago, New York, and DC. She understands the American people from both red and blue states. She gives them all sides of any story so they can make up their own minds. She's also trusted by everyone. I'll have to read that one again. She's also trusted by everyone. That's why her sources are so good. They know she will keep confidences and be honest and fair. She's fiercely independent-minded, and other journalists respect her even though she often challenges their biases. And she's a regular person. She's a devoted mom, a college football and other sports fan, a great cook, and a true Southerner. And we haven't talked about being a great cook. She's really a gourmet cook. And so tell them about your cooking. She likes to
My mom
cook.
is a great cook. You know, you grew up when your mom is from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, your relatives are from New Orleans, and grew up from New Orleans all the way through Pascagoula. You like to eat. And you like your food. And so I like to cook. Yeah, I really enjoy it. My kids like to cook, I think. I hope. My mom is a great cook, is a great cook. My papa, amazing cook, and just, I like.
It's what we do.
Yeah.
It's what we do.
You must feel like you're taking care of people too.
Well, good. All right, we've talked enough about what we wanted to share. Is there anything with the audience that you wanted to open up and ask questions?
Yeah, if anybody wants to ask a question, the microphone's
For that, I'm gonna ask.
to come down.
Okay, you want to ask me a question? I'm listening. Go ahead.
So you asked me about the future of journalism. What do you think is the future of college sports?
Your future of college sports is, I don't know that we know, Jan, with the NIL the way it is, with the power conferences taking over, with, money and all that, the brands, I don't know. And you're talking to somebody who went to Louisiana. We were the power conference. We were the power players back in the day. And it's going to be very hard for those conferences and those programs to compete with the big conferences. I don't
Just because of the
know.
money?
I don't know. A lot of people think there'll come a day when there's only 2 major conferences. I don't know. A lot of people think there'll come a
Don't
day.
you think that's ridiculous?
I don't know what I think.
I find it hard to believe that the Big Ten goes from California to, coast to
Yeah.
coast. I just find that.
I think a lot of people think.
SEC, by the way, we still all are.
SEC, baby, you're in SEC country down here.
I know.
Questions, okay?
reference to the Supreme Court, where is it written that you do not have to be a lawyer to be a Supreme Court justice? And has there ever been a Supreme Court justice that was not a lawyer?
You know, I don't know if there's ever been one that's not a lawyer, but it's not a requirement like in the Constitution or anywhere that it's been adopted. You don't have to be. I cannot imagine the way our confirmation process is, the way they grill those justices on their experience and their views on the law. It's inconceivable that a non-lawyer would be confirmed to the United States Supreme Court. I think it's gotten almost impossible for confirmation to the court for anyone that isn't a sitting judge. We have now, they're all former judges. We have a politician, governor of California, Justice O'Connor, for example, was a state legislator, first female majority leader of the state Senate. And those were considered important because, you know, sometimes those politicians, they can, you know, have seen things differently. And so now they've all become more former judges, appeals court judges, and because the confirmation process has changed a lot. It's gotten much more intense.
Also, a Supreme Court question, full disclosure too, go Tigers.
I'm a fan of LSU women's basketball,
Yes.
but I draw the line there. That's where I draw the line. I will not ever insert
Go ahead.
Recently, we've seen and heard justices criticize each other, whether they're right or left. Justice Sotomayor the other day was talking about how she's fearful that major precedents will continue to be overturned. How much sniping have you remembered over your years of covering the court?
So the question is the question is kind of this public back and forth. I thought we saw a little bit of that last summer when we saw Justice Kagan talking about wanting a code of conduct. They were going to maybe sending a few little coded messages, you know, through their public statements, whether it's in the speeches they give or the conversations like what Kim and I are doing now that they may do at a law school. But very little. And in fact, Justice Sotomayor and Justice Barrett have done this kind of thing on civics, where they go out and talk about the importance of civility. And it's actually very little. I think what you see sometimes is when a justice says something, people may sensationalize it a little more than it is intended.
And a follow-up, doesn't that erode the confidence in the court by the public to hear justices like that talking that way?
I think that's maybe a chicken or egg thing, because sometimes I think talking that way, you know, that's fair game to say that you're concerned that they're overturning precedents. But you know, that's whose ox is being bored. Like if you're a liberal, you're gonna be happy if they start overturning precedents we're getting right now from this conservative court. But if you're a conservative, you know, so it just depends on what precedent we're talking about, which ones you agree with. But I generally think in public, there's a bigger concern, you know, they go out and do these book tours now. And, you know, so you do see some of that where that can lead to things that may be misinterpreted that they say. And, you know, the concern is the public faith and confidence in the Supreme Court and its legitimacy and integrity.
Hi, I am a PhD student here at LSU who actually just moved here from DC, working in politics and policy a couple months ago. And so I'm here in the sports management department, studying the intersection of sports and politics and social change. And one of my primary interests is addressing and turning down the temperature on polarization through sports.
That's great.
And thank you. And so I'm just curious how you, as someone who exists in red and blue places, can find common ground in a media market and a society that's really diverging into two separate realities.
First of all, the sports, thank you. On this, it's interesting, we were talking just the other day about how our society is so divided and so polarized that what Kim and other people do, sports feels like the one last unifying theme, a thing that we can all rally around. I mean, when you're coaching and you've got 20,000 people, you know, nobody's talking about who's in the White House. You know, they you know, are either cheering for you or against you. It's a unifying source of good in society right now. And I think we need sports for that. I mean, I love that you're doing that. That's wonderful, because, I mean, I assume that you think we need sports. Otherwise, I don't agree with you. But I, you know, in terms of, I think part of our issue in the media, with the media is polarization. That's a real problem, because people tend to want, and I think that the decline of newspapers is also very problematic, because in the good old days when I was, you know, working with Chris Drew at the Chicago Tribune, you got a print edition and you would read all the way through the sports section, the food section, the feature section, page 4, and you would see stories that you would normally click on. You know, now we can, because of technology, we can click on just whatever we want to read. We can watch whatever news we want to watch, that, you know, whether it's a conservative broadcast or a liberal broadcast, and that fuels that polarization and divisiveness. I worry about that. I think the way that we survive as a society of democracy is that we have to listen to each other. Our founders believe that. They put the First Amendment, we put the First Amendment first to the Constitution about free press and free speech. And as journalists, we have a significant role in being fair, impartial, and always remembering that we are not historic. And so we have to restore public faith and confidence in the media as an institution by how we do our jobs. And I think if we do our jobs, do them better, do them fairly, that could go a long way. I believe that the American people want that, and people want fair coverage. It's not like Americans just want clickbait and all that stuff. I don't believe that.
Since they must teach in journalism, they ask 2 questions. I'll have 2.
Gotta do both sides.
The first one is, way back in the dark ages, Oliver Wendell Holmes said, free speech does not give you the right to cry fire in a crowded theater, nor does it give you the right to walk a crowded thoroughfare. I have talked to multiple federal judges over the years, and they think the First Amendment, at least as far as speech is concerned, is absolute, and there are no exceptions. Have you ever come across one of those cases when you're following the court?
I mean, I think that there are certain exceptions. I mean, it's very hard. I mean, for example, falsehoods are not covered by the First Amendment. If I were to go print something about Kim that I knew was demonstrably false just because I felt like I was in a bad mood that day, I mean, that would not be protected by the First Amendment. It's not absolute. None of our rights are absolute. Second Amendment, you know, the court has ruled you have a right to keep and bear arms, but that doesn't mean there can't be reasonable, as Justice Scalia wrote in his majority opinion, reasonable gun restrictions. So that's something I think, and maybe now it is because the temperature is so high, people want to talk in these absolute terms, but there have always been, I think, shades of gray in a lot of those decisions.
And the second one is just a statement, really. As a retired lawyer, I admire you for being able to get complex issues and explain them in a way that people can understand. I think it's very difficult to do that. I mean, I've read 50-page and 100-page decisions, and they're very difficult to get to a holding of where people understand them. So I admire you for being able to digest that and be able to summarize it where people can understand it.
Well, thank you, I appreciate it.
Good evening. I too am a doctorate student at the Manship School, and you alluded to it earlier. First off, thank you so much for being here and for having this poignant conversation. I would like to know, since you talked about the future of media, what do you think that the future journalists, what skills, what advice, what traits do they need to have in this current communication climate to be successful and to carry the torch, and like you mentioned, to right some of the wrongs?
I think that writing is essential. Being able to write and be a good communicate, whether you're in television or in print. Where we're going now in media is, when I was at the Chicago Tribune, we didn't really think about being on television. I used to complain about television a lot, because I'd be like, they should rip off all our stories, when I was in newspapers. But now you see the New York Times putting videos online, and you see television wanting online stories like their newspapers. So I think writing is very important, but you also have to remember that you have to listen. And I think the main thing I would say to aspiring journalists is you remember that the story is not you. It's not about you, it's about the people, and you're telling their stories. And that's what I think has gotten lost to some extent. But you have to listen, ask questions, be prepared, and then be able to write in a way that you can communicate it, whether you're on television or in print. But I guess you could say that we all should be listening. I mean, it's I think that's something that, yes, as society, we sometimes fall short on that as well. Can I ask him a question? That reminds me, what would you say for coaches? What attributes?
Well, the problem, I'm not in your professional area, but how many of you have read an article, whether it's online or in a newspaper, where the headline has nothing to do with the body?
Now, we don't write the headlines.
Everybody, raise your hand. You go, dang, that wasn't what I thought the article was gonna be about. So what is that? That's clickbait. That's what I would tell you. Why aren't journalists writing their own headlines?
We work so hard. Headlines is a skill, because when you have it, maybe not so much.
A skill is a lie.
Let me tell you.
A skill to not make
When
the
you're
connection.
writing, all right, think about it. You're picking up the paper. Pick up the paper, and it's got to be, whatever you write, the headline has to be fit. Just this, it's a real skill. It's really different. It's hard. I'm a terrible headline.
But do you
Believe me,
believe?
I wrote a headline once in college called Group Releases List. That was my headline. And honestly, that's the worst headline ever. Who wants to read that story? And no one ever said you never write a headline.
Why do you do that? You do that to get people's attention, right?
Yeah, because.
But then you read the story and it has nothing to do with the headline.
Okay, well.
My mother sends me a text. Well, baby, I didn't know you got Naismith Coach of the Year and $2 million. Mom, that's fake news. Oh, okay.
That goes to the source of news, though. But there's so much, that's also, there's so many different sources of information, and some of them are not true.
But even in beat writers, you can take a beat writer and they have a wonderful story about the game. But the headline is kind of like, well, that was kind of negative. It was a great game. But let me say this off the subject before we close. We introduced families, and I totally forgot to introduce my son Kramer. So Kramer, he's a working man now. He's employed at LSU, so we just got to find him a wife. I have one question before you ask. And this is an opinion, so I don't want to get you in trouble. do you think during this term that Trump is in office, that there will be a Supreme Court justice that will retire?
Yes.
You do?
I think justice, I mean, you can't predict that, and, they may not even know at this point. But I think that Justice Alito may retire next year. He was nominated by George W. Bush, who's been on the court for 20 years. He, did his public service, and I think he would like to enjoy life and his family. And the climate now, the justices are, we talk about our polarized society and divisiveness, but the justices they receive a lot of threats, and some are quite serious. Death threats, protests at their homes. They often have to wear bulletproof vests when they're in public. Justice Kavanaugh is very fortunate. He and his family are alive today. A man is in prison charged with attempted assassination. And that's a very sobering reflection, I think, of some of the discourse that we see in society. So I think that perhaps Justice Alito, I wish would give President Trump his fourth nomination to the court. It wouldn't change the balance of the court. Alito is one of the more conservative justices, but it would keep that seat conservative for a generation.
Well, I know you're looking at us, it's time to go. I will say this is a first for me to be nice to a reporter. It also shows the side of me that if you're a good and fair reporter, I'll be nice to you, right? Thank you for having me and asking me to be a part of this.
Well, thank you so much, and this is the time for thanks. How about another round of applause? And we do have some sponsors. We want to thank Chick Moore, along with the Riley Center and the Manchik School. We had support today from the LG Law Center and from the Ogden Honors College. And Jan, thank you earlier today for spending time with our law students and with some students at the Honors College.
It's my pleasure. They were very
They asked great
impressive. I
questions.
feel very good about the future after talking to those students. It was very impressive.
So we're here at the Riley Center, we're trying to do great work, we're mediating process with public affairs and public policy. The staff is mainly undergrad and graduate students, and they helped to put this great programming together. I want to thank the whole Riley Center team for your work today, especially Maria DeRoche. Thank you, Maria. This video will be on the Manchik School's YouTube and the Riley Center's social media. We ask you to follow all our social media at the Riley Center. And again, we thank you all for coming. And good night.
Joe.